Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Street Peace Coalition. My name is Johnny Muhammad. We are coming to you live from CAN TV Studios on 13th and Wood. We're glad to have you join us this evening. This evening we'd like to pick up on the thing that we were referring to last week with regard to assault weapons. In the wake of the deadly shooting in Orlando, Florida, where 49 individuals were killed and I think at least 24 people were wounded. This past Sunday, unfortunately, we witnessed something akin to that right here on the streets of Chicago. On 45th and Hermitage, an assault weapon was used on a 17-year-old boy. Police believe it was an AK-47 that sprayed bullets right outside of Holy Cross Church. The incident happened about 10 minutes before the church service actually let out. We're starting to see these weapons be made available on our streets and in our communities. Viewer, be very clear, these weapons are very dangerous. They are high capacity magazine weapons, and they're capable of firing off up to 200 to 300 rounds per minute. The thing that we really want to talk about with you this evening and get some feedback from our listening audience is what is the challenges that America face in getting these weapons off the street? Why has the U.S. Congress been such a graveyard for the kind of legislation that will implement safe, effective, sensible gun control? And are our communities being put at risk by the inability of Congress to address this pressing issue? We're starting to see incidents where assault rifles are used on the streets of Chicago, on the south side of the city, and on the west side of the city. And let me just tell you a few brief things about what an assault weapon is, so we all can be clear on what kind of weapon we're actually talking about. The AK-47, right? It is also referred to as a Kalashnikov. It was named after a Russian manufacturer by the name of Mikhail Kalashnikov. It was developed in the Soviet Union. It is fully automatic, which means that it will fire as long as the trigger is pulled and that there are rounds in the magazine. Now that's opposed to a semi-automatic weapon where the trigger must be pulled each time the bullet is fired. Now, the velocity of an assault weapon is 2,300 to 3,300 feet per second, as opposed to a handgun, which is 800 to 1,200 feet per second. An assault weapon can fire off up to 400 rounds per minute. This past week, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal that was made by the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that upheld the ban of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Currently, there are 7 states, including Washington, D.C., that have banned assault weapons. The reality is that the United States have some of the most permissive gun rights in the world. And we have to be very clear about the danger of these kinds of weapons on the street. So we want to get some feedback from you. And if you're a gun owner, we want to talk to you to find out how you feel about guns on our streets. We're very clear about, in our position, that certain kinds of weapons should not be made available to the American people. Under no circumstances should the American people have in their possession in their homes assault rifles that can fire 300 to 400 rounds per minute. Those kinds of weapons are usually only weapons that should be made available during wartime situations. And usually what happens is when we want to talk about controlling certain weapons such as these, the opposition likes to conflate the argument to talking about gun rights and how guns are being taken away from the American people. So that's an age-old strategy. The strategy of trying to make the American people believe that gun control advocates want to go after your guns and take them away from you. Currently, since President Obama has been elected, there has been over 100 million guns sold in this country. So that's in the past 8 years. We've had over 100 million guns sold in this country. Clearly, the American people's safety and security is being put at risk because of a few people who want to hold on to certain kinds of weapons that are only appropriate for military-style combat. I'm joined now by Brother Ernest Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
Ernest, you've heard what I've been speaking to this evening about the availability of assault weapons and the lethality of assault weapons on our street. And as I mentioned to our audience, just this past Sunday, which is yesterday, a 17-year-old boy was killed by an AK-47 on 45th and Hermitage. He was killed very close to Holy Cross Hospital, and it was bullets in surrounding buildings where the shooter apparently had sprayed trying to kill the young man, and of course he was dead on the scene. What is your reflections on having certain kind of weapons like these available on our streets?
Well, I have been watching a few brothers post things on the internet, Facebook and stuff, with regards to guns, and I have heard the stories of weapons being left in our community in the alley and so on and so forth, and I know a lot about that. Unfortunately or fortunately, but we were always in the neighborhoods. We were always given some kind of way information got out to us of how to access weapons. I mean, on the west side, the freight trains were famous for being broken into for weapons, automatic weapons, handguns, and the like. The south side, the low end, there were various, there was always, in the early 90s, the access to weapons just became so easy. So, it got to the point where you had guys who were once selling drugs stopped selling drugs and started selling guns.
Now, when you mention the freight trains, that's when the train stops for some reason, right?
Well,
on the railways coming through a community, it stops, and then people in the neighborhood find some way to break into that train and access a cache of weapons.
Yeah, whether it stopped or not, we were, they would run along the side of the train, and for whatever reason, someone knew which cart the guns were in.
Well, yeah, that was my next question. How would they know which car the guns were in?
Now, that has always been a mystery, but every single time one of the carts were broken into, lo and behold, the guns were there.
Mm. And they just so happen to be passing through our neighborhood.
Yes, sir.
That's the route that they take.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Right over there by what is those projects that's on the west side, right off of Western? Those projects right over there. It's
Okay.
always to be the freights right over there used to get broken into all the time. So our community, I could say, in the early '90s, at one point it was difficult to even get an automatic. It was difficult. But as, you know, I say around 91, 92, it just, guns in the community just became so easily accessed. I mean, and like I said, there were literally guys driving around the neighborhood with trunk full of guns. They would open the back, hey, what you want? We got it for sale. I was like, wow. It was never like that. And so when I hear these young guys today saying that they're finding guns in the alley and you know, the access to these automatic weapons and these extended clips, I'm not surprised, because when I was running the streets, like I said, we had a very big access to weapons. It was easy as getting a gun was almost as easy as walking to the corner store and buying a 40 ounce. Literally, it really was. I mean, there was no difficulty with in a matter of an hour
you
or two.
basically knew who had guns,
And
where
they
to
were
buy
easy
it
to get
from.
'em. Yes, sir.
You know, yeah.
Yes, sir. It was easier. I mean, that was the last thing you had to worry about to get a gun. That was easy. I mean, and it's sad today. And so when they speak about gun control, I don't really understand what they're talking about, because there's no such thing in the black community. In the south sides and west sides of Chicago, there is no gun control. There is no gun control, and I refuse to believe that these gun stores or individuals are selling off their guns. It's just too many.
Well, you know, that was my next question. How do you feel about the gun buyback program? Do you think that helps or that's effective in trying to get guns off the street when the city of Chicago or the Chicago Police Department has a gun buyback program and they offer $50, $100 in order to purchase your gun, no question asked? Do you think that's effective?
It depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to these young guys that's out here in the thick of things, no. Selling their gun would not be a wise thing to do. But if you're talking to someone who may be in desperate need of money, and probably is, even with that type of person, with the mentality on the streets, he would probably, in his mind maybe, he would probably believe that he has a greater chance of accessing some money with the gun than without it. That's just facts.
Now, guns that were sold on the street, about how much did they cost? I mean, how much could you get a gun for?
$100, $150. I mean, back then, you can get a 380, little 6-shot 380 for $100, $150, $125. A 38 for no more than $150. Probably a 357, probably about $250. A 9, depending on how many times.
A 357, huh?
Yeah.
And a 9mm.
Depending on how many times it's shot, probably about $200-$300.
Okay.
Easy.
Okay.
And in the 90s, I mean.
When you say how many times it's shot, what do you mean?
Well, you know, like now they have the extended clips where they literally have a handgun that can take a 30-round clip that usually goes in a Tech 9 or a Mac 10. They have a handgun that same clip, either if the gun is a 9mm or a 45, that same clip will fit into a handgun. and it will be able to fire off that entire magazine. So now in the mid 90s, that's when everybody started to become very conscious of that, the extended clips, because I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was either the Glock or the Smith and Wesson. Those guns, the clips were interchangeable. So you could take a 9mm clip and put it in a Glock handgun, and it'll shoot off the whole 30 rounds. Which a Tech 9 typically got 25 a 25 clip magazine or a 30 clip, but it would fit in a Glock handgun. So now it seems as though they're making those guns like that, tailor made for our community, making sure that the young brothers got them. I mean, and you know, they some of them are converting their guns from semi-automatic to fully automatic. So it's almost to the point where you have a person with a handgun, the concealment of a handgun, but almost the capability of a, you know, of a.
Do you think that increasing the penalties for illegal gun possession, do you think that's an effective way of reducing the amount of guns on the street and reducing the number of people who have guns illegally? Like raising it from, I think there's currently a law in Springfield that seeks to raise the punishment for having an illegal gun from 3 years to like 7 years or something like that. Do you think that's an effective way of addressing the problem?
No, I don't personally. I don't. It's like, to me, if we don't deal with our people's savagery, no matter how, that's the same, to me, that's the same concept. And I hope no one's offended by this, but that's the same concept to say give everybody a job and the violence will stop. I don't completely agree with that, because if we don't get our people operating on some other kind of mindset, that's not going to be enough. You know, all of these things have to work together. The jobs are key; they're important, but they're not the say all be all. There's not a one answer to this maze that we're dealing with.
Right.
It's not, you know, one thing is not going to answer it. So to punish people more for the possession of a gun, I don't see what you're going to get out of that. Outside of, I mean, we tried the jail thing. The jails are overcrowded, and that same money could be used to reform the person. So, and it probably, the resource may be less. I mean, because we spend $40,000 per inmate or $27,000 per inmate. What does it take to reform a person? What does it take to get a person back on track? So I don't, you know, I think it's the same thing that we're on. We're trying to get people to come up with a different solution to their problems, opposed to murdering each other.
Right.
So society has to, in some way, come up with a greater solution than to lock them up. That's not the answer to every, you know.
Yeah, and actually,
and it allows you not to think. You just, you know, lock them up. Just lock them up. It allows you not to give it any thought, to be creative with the situation, and it end up overall helping the whole community. You just want everybody locked up, and the jails are filled up. And then when that backfires on you, what are you going to do?
Yeah, actually, it contributes to the scheme of mass incarceration. So if you flood the community with weapons, and then you bring the police in order to catch people with illegal weapons, then that's an automatic sentence right there, right? Now, actually, I would not be opposed to stiffer penalties for people who have illegal weapons if we can see some parallel educational efforts to make sure, and some efforts to make sure that guns are not on the street.
Right.
So if you do one without the other, that's just a recipe to continue mass incarceration.
Right.
What kind of community educational efforts, public educational efforts in our community that dissuade young people from having a gun, from possession of a gun, from being anywhere near a gun in a way that they can have access to it and use it for nefarious purposes? We don't see any action like that coming from the city or elected officials, anybody like that. Any community education initiatives that really talk about the kind of penalties and what can happen if you get caught with a gun illegally.
Right.
So I think one of the things that we see in this country is that certain organizations and groups are willing to hold the safety of the American people hostage in order to hold on to assault weapons. They literally are putting us at risk in the community. People who are living in neighborhoods peacefully in cities and states and towns all across America by refusing to ban automatic assault weapons.
Right.
Because we don't want those kind of weapons in our community. But the refusal to ban them means that there's certain individuals that will have them. And right now we have people in America who are killing each other over parking spaces.
Yes, sir.
Right? Who's sitting around playing Grand Theft Auto all day. That's all they doing.
Right, yes, sir.
And they're taking in all of this violence, right?
Yes, sir.
That coupled with the propaganda that President Obama is trying to take your gun from you, that drives up gun sales, and before you know it, the country, the city, the communities are flooded with weapons, and we don't have a defense.
Right.
The first responsibility of the government is to protect its people.
Right.
But we are in a situation now where the people have to be protected against themselves, themselves, Brother Ernest.
Yes, sir.
I mean, right now, we're starting to see people who are deranged, who are depressed, who have mental illnesses, but in some way, shape, or form, they have access to automatic weapons, and they become a threat and a danger to common, ordinary people on the street.
Well, I believe that these automatic weapons are unnecessary in the cities. I think they're totally unnecessary. I think that they should be used for only combat or war times. I think that no normal citizen in their home or whatever should have an AK or SK or what is that?
Let me ask you, can you imagine
AR-22?
Can you imagine a scenario where you would need an AK-47 or an M16 or AR-15 in your house to defend yourself and your family? Can you imagine a situation where you would need that?
That it just seems unnecessary. I mean, if who are you being attacked by? The whole block? I mean, usually it's one or two. Lucky if it's three people that will, try to merge on your home at one time. So I'm not. I mean, you putting, those wartime weapons. I don't really understand the need of a weapon of that magnitude. I don't see the need of it.
I mean, even when we think about individuals who have had the misfortune of experiencing a home invasion.
Right.
Now, we do know that something like that has happened in our community. But can you think of any kind of situation where the person would have been better off if they had an AK-47 in that particular situation. I mean, would have made matters better, or would it have made matters worse?
Well, in my opinion, with that, I just believe that a weapon with those many rounds is totally unnecessary, and I think they could have prevented themselves from being hurt or killed or robbed with a typical handgun if they had the right to have it. I mean, I don't see the necessity of a gun like that. I just don't see it. It just, it's just overly.
Unfortunately, we have young people in our community right now who, for some reason or another, see the necessity in having an automatic weapon. And those kind of weapons are weapons that really frighten me.
Yes, sir.
Because they don't need to be on our streets, and we need to find some way to reach these brothers to get those weapons out of their hand. There's no reason at all, as you mentioned earlier, that under any circumstances should those weapons be in ordinary communities across this country.
No, and they, again, the gun, if you're not careful, it gives you this sense of power. So now I got a bigger gun than you. I know you got a gun, but I have a bigger gun, and I got more shots than you,
right.
And I'm more macho than you, and I'm going, and we intimidating each other, and it's amounting to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're terrorizing our own communities, and that's our goal, is to try to convince one another to not terrorize our own neighborhood. We are undermining our community. We're destroying our neighborhoods with our behavior, and we're hoping and praying that we could get better. And this gun violence and it shows that we have no concern for our own lives. The way we murder one another over arguments or disagreements, it's somewhat to the point where do our community suffering from mental issues or unresolved, just overly stressed or something, but our community, is attacking one another or turning in on one another, it's getting terrible.
Yes.
And so we have to dig in deep and get all these different organizations to do all that they can to prevent us from eradicating ourselves, because I think that's what we're being, the pressure of life is doing to our community.
Well, part of the thing that we have to do, and we should mention this before we close out, we encourage the viewers to reach out to their locally elected officials, their aldermen, their U.S. representatives, to really encourage them to pass sensible gun laws, to get automatic weapons off the street, and make sure that those weapons are not available or in the hands of ordinary people. We want to thank you again for joining us with another edition of the Street Peace Coalition, and we will see you next week.
Yes.